I was petrified about it, by the way. And, we got through it. And I think it was during that time period when I started to think about things.
Famous for being a judge on talent shows, Simon Cowell built an empire with his tough persona and striking confidence. But everything changed after a hospital visit turned his world upside down. His young son was diagnosed with something no parent wanted to hear. Suddenly, the red carpets, the shows, and the spotlight meant nothing. He walked away from it all without warning, leaving fans and colleagues wondering what went wrong. Join us as we find the heartbreaking truth behind Simon's emotional goodbye. A reason for change. Simon Cowell spent years building his name in the entertainment world. He judged talent shows that millions of people watched every week. His sharp words and strong opinions turned him into a famous face on TV. From Pop Idol and American Idol to The X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, he always found his way to the center of attention. Also, his company, Psycho Productions, trained and managed artists who later became stars. Music and television shaped his life. Work came first. Long hours, big deals, and endless travel filled his schedule. But everything started changing in 2013. That year, Simon began dating Lauren Silverman. Her husband at the time, Andrew Silverman, was actually Simon's friend. When Andrew filed for divorce, accusing Lauren of adultery, he named Simon in the documents. This matter quickly reached the press. Soon, the headlines spread everywhere. Then the story took a new turn when it became known that Lauren and Simon were expecting a baby together. The divorce became a hot topic, but it didn't go to court. In August that year, the Silvermans settled everything privately. This helped Simon avoid public court appearances, and he stayed away from becoming directly involved in the legal process. Shortly after, Simon confirmed that Lauren was pregnant with his child. Finally, on February 14, 2014, their son was born. That day changed Simon's world completely. It wasn't just about the birth of a child. It was the moment that forced Simon to stop and look at his life differently. For many years, Simon had no plans to become a father. He thought he was too set in his ways. Work always came before anything else. He enjoyed his freedom and never imagined raising a child. But the instant he saw the scan of his unborn son, everything inside him changed. That image made him realize that something had shifted. A new part of him woke up. The man who once said he'd never have kids now found himself thinking about family life all the time. The name they chose, Eric Philip Cowell, was a strong connection to Simon's father. That decision meant a lot. Naming his son after his late father brought back old memories and created something new. Simon held on to the idea of passing down something valuable. He wanted Eric to grow up differently from other celebrity children. From the very beginning, he made that clear. No convoy for school runs, no silver spoon handed out too early. He believed in teaching his son how to earn things through effort. As Eric began to grow, Simon started to change his routine. He turned down big offers that would pull him away from home for long periods. He began putting his son first. He used to focus only on ratings and deals, but now he paid attention to playtime, bedtime stories, and school events. Whenever Eric faced a challenge, Simon stood by, ready to help and protect him. He didn't just watch from the sidelines, he jumped in and made sure things didn't get too hard for his son. Even though Simon still worked, he built his schedule around Eric's needs. The loud world of television slowly gave way to a softer side of him that few people had seen. He no longer chased every deal. He thought more about time spent at home. Being a father brought out emotions that he thought were long gone. After losing both parents, Simon didn't expect to feel love like that again 219 to 228. But Eric's arrival brought that love back. Every day brought something new, and each small moment with his son began to matter more than anything else. Yet little did he know that Eric wasn't like every other child. Observations and concerns. As Eric got older, Simon began picking up on little signs that stood out. These small things didn't seem like problems at first, but they stayed in Simon's mind. He paid close attention to the way Eric acted in certain situations. Although nothing looked alarming, something seemed unusual. It wasn't worry that pushed him. It was something that made him change the way he handled his own routine. He didn't talk much about it to others, but he could feel a change building inside him. As Eric moved from toddler years into early childhood, that deep concern started to grow. Simon had always looked out for his son, but now his watchfulness began to grow stronger. Each small moment with Eric seemed to carry extra weight. It wasn't just about the usual worry that comes with parenting. It came from a place of genuine connection. He kept noticing certain things that didn't match what he had seen in other children. Eric had always kept to himself. As the second birthday came closer, Simon realized his son still hadn't started speaking. While other kids around the same age were forming words and putting small sentences together, Eric stayed mostly silent. At first, Simon tried to believe that maybe Eric was just taking his time. Maybe he would start talking later. But the thought stayed in his head, and no matter how hard he tried to brush it off, it kept coming back. He could not help but think that his son's behavior wasn't normal. When they went out together, Eric often seemed overwhelmed. Loud places, flashing lights, people everywhere. Eric would cover his ears or turn his head away. Simon figured he was just reacting to all the noise. He thought maybe it was just part of being young in a grown-up world. But this happened more than once, and it didn't stop. The same reactions kept showing up, even in more familiar places. It was already getting out of hand. People close to Simon told him not to worry. They reminded him that every child grows at their own unique pace. They told him some children take longer to talk, walk, or warm up to the world. But even with all those reassurances, Simon couldn't shake the feeling that his son was living a different reality. His entire career had been built on observing people, picking up details others missed, and knowing what made someone stand out. But with Eric, he felt something he couldn't explain. At night, sleep stopped coming easily. Simon would lie in bed and go over everything in his head. He kept thinking about Eric's future and whether he was doing enough. He started reading. He dug into books and articles about child development. He searched online, trying to learn what might explain what he was seeing. But the more he found, the more questions came up. Nothing was clear. Eric's condition was showing up gradually, and it would take more than just time and care. Eric did show early signs of deep intelligence. He noticed things quickly, figured things out without needing to be told. He paid attention to details. He understood more than people expected. But the way he shared his thoughts was different. It wasn't through words. It was through actions, looks, small movements that showed how aware he really was. Simon began to understand that Eric might not follow the same path as other kids. He was making his own path, using his own steps. The worry never came from disappointment. It came from love. Simon wanted to make sure Eric had the right tools, the right space, the right help. He didn't care about traditional goals anymore. What mattered now were the little wins. A moment when Eric looked him in the eye and connected. A sound or gesture that showed progress. But deep down, Simon knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead looked different, and he had to prepare for what was coming, a father's love. While Simon Cowell faced deep concerns about Eric's development, very few people on the outside had any idea of what was really going on. Most still saw him as the bold judge who never held back, the man known for his sharp remarks and firm opinions. But inside his world, things had changed. The man who once spent every waking hour on shows and deals had started pulling away from that life. Something else had taken over, something that made him see things differently. Eric had made a few rare public appearances. One stood out on Britain's Got Talent when he reached out and pressed the golden buzzer during a performance. The crowd cheered and people watching at home smiled. That sweet moment between father and son showed a new side of Simon that many hadn't seen before. But the truth behind that moment was more complex. That day had been planned out carefully. Every small detail had been arranged, so Eric would feel safe and at ease. Simon had figured out how to shape his surroundings for Eric. He removed anything that might feel too loud or too bright. He brought in only the people Eric trusted. These steps weren't random. They came from weeks and months of watching, learning, and adjusting. And as the media picked up the story, they began writing about how fatherhood had softened Simon. What they didn't realize was how deep that change really went. He wasn't just more gentle. He was changing his life for someone who saw the world through a different lens. Simon didn't just reduce his workload. He stopped taking offers that would pull him too far from home. He reshaped his entire work schedule to fit around Eric's needs. At first, some thought this was just how new fathers behaved. They figured he would go back to his old self after a while, but this wasn't a phase. This was a complete shift in how Simon approached his world. Online discussions started to grow. People began to point out small things about Eric. Some viewers noticed that he reacted differently during events. Others said Simon looked more protective. But Simon stayed away from conversations like that. He didn't feed rumors. Rather, he focused on the one thing that mattered, and that was his son's well-being. Eric didn't follow the usual path, and that was okay. He had his own rhythm, his own way of doing things. And for Simon, that became the new standard. Behind the scenes, Simon reached out to experts. He looked for answers, booked appointments, and kept asking questions. He read as much as he could and listened to professionals who understood child development. Every meeting brought in new ideas. Some gave hope, some brought more questions. But Simon kept pushing forward. His goal wasn't just to find out what was happening. He wanted to understand how to support Eric the right way. As time passed, Simon began to see the world differently. He had spent his life judging talent, deciding who could handle fame and who couldn't. He had built careers by setting standards and pushing people toward perfection. But now he was being taught a different perspective by his own child. However, some of the most special moments happened when no one else was around. They took place during small routines and in safe spaces where Eric felt free to express himself. Simon held on to those moments. They meant more than awards or headlines ever could. The stories in the press kept building. Speculation started to grow louder. But Simon knew he would only speak when the time felt right. He needed to do it in a way that kept Eric protected. Until then, he stayed focused on what mattered most, helping his son feel seen, heard, understood, and supported in a world that didn't slow down for anyone. However, it wasn't long before things started falling into place for them. Eric's heartbreaking diagnosis. The change began during a family trip when Eric was just 4. Simon had put together what he thought would be the perfect vacation. He wanted time away, a break from work, and special moments with his son. But once they arrived, things didn't go the way he had planned. Eric struggled through each part of the trip. At first, Simon thought it was just the usual trouble with adjusting, but soon it became too clear to ignore. The resort, with its loud sounds and busy atmosphere, pushed him too far. Eric didn't handle new places well. He didn't want to eat the new food. He didn't like the change in his sleep routine. Every small shift in schedule, every strange sight or sound brought out reactions that left Simon confused and helpless. Everything played out one evening. Families filled the open terrace, eating, laughing, and talking over the background music. Eric froze. His hands flew to his ears. He started rocking back and forth in his chair. The clinking dishes and rising chatter made it worse. No matter how gently Simon reached out, Eric seemed unreachable. Nothing seemed to work for him. Something inside him had shut down. Simon sat beside him, trying to understand what was going on. Later that night, Simon called Lauren. They both knew they couldn't wait any longer. They had to reach out for help. Not because they were afraid, but because they had to figure out how to be better parents for Eric. They needed to learn how to support him properly. Months passed. Specialists watched Eric closely. They ran assessments, they took notes, they asked Simon and Lauren detailed questions. Then one morning in December 2018, Simon walked into a small office to hear the results. The moment felt heavy, even though he had been preparing for it. The diagnosis arrived: autism spectrum disorder. Those words didn't surprise Simon. Still, hearing them made everything real. It wasn't just a thought anymore, it was fact. Simon began to understand more about his son. Eric's brain didn't work the same as most children's, but it had its own way of solving problems. Eric would face challenges that required careful planning. He would need help in ways most people could not see or understand. One of the doctors explained the signs. Eric had trouble with speech. He reacted strongly to certain sounds. He needed daily routines to feel safe. All of this matched the diagnosis. Simon sat still, taking in the information. The report wasn't only about the challenges, it also showed what Eric could do well. He picked up patterns quickly. He saw things others missed. He could stay focused on one subject for a long time. His memory for sequences was impressive. The experts called his condition moderate. That meant he'd need a lot of help in some areas, but also had strengths that could grow with the right support. The goal wasn't to try and change him. It was changing the environment around him so he could grow. Meanwhile, the real struggle wasn't the diagnosis. It was figuring out how to tell the world. Simon had spent most of his life in the public eye, but Eric wasn't made for that world. His privacy mattered more than anything. Simon knew he had to protect him, but he also wanted people to see what made Eric special. That evening, Simon sat down beside Eric, who was carefully lining up toy cars on the floor. Each one had to be in the perfect spot. His focus was deep, steady. Watching him, Simon saw things clearly. Eric wasn't missing anything. He wasn't broken. He was just different. And that difference came with a beauty that didn't need fixing. The diagnosis also helped Simon make sense of the past. He recalled changing his work plans, avoiding loud events, being overprotective. Back then, he didn't know why, but now he saw it clearly. His instincts had pushed him to shape life around Eric's needs before he even knew what those needs were. Now there was no more guessing. Eric needed speech therapy to help him speak clearly. He needed occupational therapy to help with motor skills. He needed behavioral support to handle daily challenges. And Simon had to step into a new role. He had to study, ask questions, and keep up with new methods. He had to turn away from old routines and build new ones that fit Eric's world. The life he once lived had started to shift. Each decision now came with Eric in mind, making adjustments. After the diagnosis, Simon Cowell's life took a sharp turn. Everything he used to focus on, fame, travel, shows, and business, suddenly stepped aside. His days now began and ended with Eric in mind. The unpredictable life he once enjoyed disappeared. In its place came structure, order, and careful planning. Eric needed that. He needed things to happen in the same way every day. Simon had to build a world where his son could feel steady and safe. Back in Malibu, Simon didn't waste time. He brought in professionals to help redesign the house. Lights were softened, noises were reduced, textures were changed. Everything was made to suit Eric's needs. Every room had a purpose. Nothing was random anymore. From the way furniture was placed to the sounds that filled each space, everything was chosen to help Eric feel at ease. The home became a kind of safe haven where Eric could be himself without pressure. Simon built his days around Eric's routine. Mornings started with simple tasks, followed by therapy sessions. Some days it was speech therapy, other times it was occupational therapy. Social interactions had to be planned down to the smallest detail. Playdates looked easy from the outside, but behind them were hours of careful preparation. Simon would go through each possible moment in his head to make sure Eric didn't feel overwhelmed. Their connection became deeper, not because of words, but because of effort and time. At the same time, Simon had to deal with feelings he hadn't expected. He didn't feel sad for who Eric was. He felt sad for the dreams he once pictured, the quick road trips, the carefree chats, the little jokes that fathers often share with their sons. Those things didn't happen with Eric. Instead, Simon had to learn how to notice small signs. Eric didn't use many words. He spoke through movement, looks, and actions. Slowly, Simon picked up on these signs and learned what they meant. The therapy sessions brought their own challenges. Simon watched Eric try hard to form sounds that didn't come easily. In occupational therapy, he saw Eric work through exercises that helped him handle things like touch, sound, and movement. Nothing came easy, but every step forward brought joy. A new word, a longer hug, even eye contact. Each one meant progress. Each one mattered. During this time, Simon started to turn down jobs. He handed off projects to people he trusted. Staying strong became harder when loneliness set in. Simon couldn't talk openly about what was going on. Even people close to him didn't fully understand the pressure. Every decision he made was intentional. There was no room to get it wrong. At night, he often sat in Eric's room watching him sleep. In those hours when the world outside had gone quiet, the responsibility felt heavy. They asked questions, but Simon kept his answers short. Eric's life wasn't for the world to judge. He couldn't explain it without bringing attention to Eric, and that was something he didn't want. Simon wasn't in any way sad because Eric was different. He felt the weight of knowing that the world might not always treat Eric kindly. People might not take the time to see how special Eric really was. That thought stayed with him. He had to keep building a world where Eric could grow strong, even if the rest of the world didn't see the value in it. Dealing with public exposure. As 2019 moved along, Simon Cowell found himself stuck in a situation that kept growing harder to handle. The rumors about Eric had started to build up slowly, showing up in online gossip threads and stories in entertainment news. At first, they were just passing comments, but as the year went on, they picked up speed. The guessing game about Eric's development had grown into something louder and more uncomfortable. Simon kept an eye on what people were saying. He saw strangers make assumptions about Eric without knowing anything about him. Some people tried to be kind but still didn't understand. Others used old, harmful ideas about autism that didn't belong in any serious discussion. It upset Simon deeply. He had never felt such a strong need to protect someone before. People around him told him to let it pass, to move on and say nothing. But that didn't feel right. He kept going back and forth in his mind. If he stayed silent, the false stories might grow stronger. But if he spoke up, he could pull his son into a spotlight Eric had never asked for. The choice was heavy. Then, one day, a tabloid crossed a line. They posted photos of Eric during a moment where too much noise and confusion had overwhelmed him. The article twisted what had happened, turning it into something to laugh at or pick apart. That was the moment Simon knew he had to speak out. At that point, he put together a short message. It wasn't long, and it didn't go into deep detail. He simply explained that Eric had autism. He asked for respect and understanding. He reminded people that Eric was loved and happy, just that he experienced life differently. That very message reached far. Parents of autistic children began sending letters. Advocacy groups reached out to thank him. Many fans showed love and support. But that wasn't the end of it. Almost at once, the attention on Eric grew. Each time he stepped out in public, people began to look too closely. Every movement, every smile, every hesitation was picked apart by strangers who thought they knew better. Simon had wanted to clear up false ideas, but now he saw how the truth brought a new kind of pressure. News outlets turned Eric into a headline. People turned his diagnosis into a public story. Life became more exhausting, but Simon kept pushing through it. He had to fight on two fronts, protecting Eric's space while also spreading helpful information. He began speaking at events and giving interviews where he shared the need for early help, strong support, and kindness. He talked about how autism didn't mean someone couldn't grow, succeed, or shine. But even while he worked to help others, he made sure not to go into details about Eric's personal journey. That part stayed private. He knew that being open came with risks, especially when the public didn't always care. What hurt the most was seeing some people act like Eric's autism was a problem to fix, instead of something to understand and accept. Still, there were good moments. Parents shared how his story gave them strength. Advocates thanked him for using his fame in a helpful way. Teachers and therapists spoke up and said they felt supported. These moments helped Simon hold on. He saw that even though the road had been hard, he had helped others feel seen. Through all the noise, he kept building a world around where love and protection for people like Eric thrived. A different version of fatherhood. As the years slowly moved forward, Simon Cowell began to go through changes that reached deep into his personal life. He was not losing his son, Eric, but he was letting go of the picture he once held in his mind. He had always imagined a certain kind of future, filled with typical moments, the kind many parents take for granted. He had pictured teaching Eric how to ride a bike on a sunny afternoon, talking about friends from school, or hearing stories about playground adventures. Those dreams had once felt so simple and clear. But after Eric's diagnosis, Simon had to put down that version of fatherhood and pick up a new one. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, piece by piece, as he watched the world through Eric's eyes. He no longer saw life the same way. His understanding of people, especially those with communication struggles or sensory needs, started to grow. He could no longer enjoy watching talent shows the same way, knowing how many gifted children never even got through the door because the world wasn't built for them. Everything around him began to take on a new meaning. This goodbye was not just about a dream, it was also about his former lifestyle. Before, Simon had the freedom to plan trips on short notice, show up at events without worry, or take a break whenever he felt like it. Now every plan needed to revolve around Eric's comfort. Every outing had to be prepared carefully. Loud noises, unfamiliar places, and long days could bring trouble, and Simon had to stay 2 steps ahead. He started turning down invitations and skipping events he once enjoyed. The smallest things, like going to a restaurant or flying on a plane, needed structure and thought. It wasn't easy, but he adjusted. The hardest part, though, came from the dreams he once had for Eric. He had imagined a smooth path forward, full of easy moments and proud achievements. That path was now covered in obstacles that neither of them had expected. But that didn't mean those dreams were gone. They just had to take new forms. Eric had his own strengths, and Simon began to notice them more and more. But the journey would be longer, and Simon had to figure out how to lift Eric up every step of the way. People close to Simon started to notice the change. He spoke less, kept more to himself, and sometimes seemed far away in thought. He was now carrying a feeling that he couldn't easily describe, a sadness that showed up during family events or when he saw other children move through life with ease. It wasn't about love. His love for Eric never faded. It was about the loss of moments he thought they would share. Birthdays with big friend groups, spontaneous father-son talks, or even the sound of Eric calling out to him with ease. These things might never happen. At school events, Simon often smiled and clapped like other parents, but behind that smile was the truth. Those moments didn't come easy. They were built through long hours of therapy, patient guidance, and steady care. But while Simon let go of one version of fatherhood, he stepped into something even deeper. He began to build a connection with Eric that didn't need many words. They shared moments through glances, through various body movements, through understanding. It was a different kind of bond, one that grew stronger with each passing day. By giving up old dreams, Simon made room for new ones shaped around who Eric really was and the strength they were building together. What are your thoughts on the changes Simon has had to go through for his son? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.